Here's a thought experiment. Pick up your phone. Open any app you use every day: Instagram, TikTok, Google Maps, Amazon, Uber. Now ask yourself a simple question. What makes that app valuable? The standard answer is engineers, algorithms, servers, venture capital, and the organizational skill to coordinate all of it. That's the story Silicon Valley tells about itself, and it's the story every business school teaches. It is partly true. It is also, on close inspection, only half of the picture. Consider what you actually brought to the transaction when you opened the app. You paid for the phone, the electricity, the data plan, and the replacement every 2 to 3 years. You posted the content, wrote the reviews, took the photos, rated the products. You spent the attention that trained the algorithm. You are the reason advertisers pay anything at all. No users, no ad revenue, no valuation. The standard counterargument says, yes, users provide all that, but platforms coordinate it, and coordination is where value is created. That is a fair point, and worth taking seriously. So let's take it seriously, and not dismiss it. Who really designed the land? A common defense of platforms goes like this: the users may fill the city, but the company designed the streets. Without the protocols, the algorithms, the payment systems, the trust layer, all that user activity would be noise. Design comes first, and design deserves the returns. There is real truth in this. It also doesn't settle the question. Most of the foundational design is not owned by any platform. The internet runs on open protocols: TCP, IP, HTTP, SMTP, DNS, maintained by non-profit standards bodies. Your browser is built on open-source code. The encryption that makes e-commerce possible is public research. The foundational streets were laid by communities, governments, and volunteer engineers, not by any of today's trillion-dollar firms. And the specific design each platform adds on top is, technically, highly substitutable. Facebook replaced MySpace, which replaced Friendster. Google replaced Alta Vista, which replaced Lycos. TikTok is eating Instagram, which ate Vine. Uber's core design is a year's worth of engineering that competent teams have cloned many times. What cannot be cloned in a year is the population already using a given app. What is actually scarce? But now a serious objection arrives, and it deserves a direct answer. A thoughtful reader will push back. The platform's real moat is not its code. It's the network effect, the connections, the data accumulation, the market-side lock-in. And platforms are the entities that organize those network effects into existence. So isn't the platform's true contribution precisely the creation of that network? This is the strongest version of the counterargument, and it is partly right. Network effects are what make a TikTok or an Uber hard to displace. And yes, platforms play a real role in catalyzing them. But look closely at what a network effect actually is. It is users connected to users, creators connected to audiences, drivers connected to riders, sellers connected to buyers. The substrate of every network effect is a set of human relationships. Facebook did not create the friendship between you and your cousin, it recorded it. TikTok did not create the bond between a dancer and her fans, it matched them. Uber did not create the willingness of a driver to take a rider across town, it routed them. Platforms are, in a precise sense, the governors of network effects, not their source. They set the rules, shape the incentives, control the interfaces, real power, and worth acknowledging as power. But the underlying asset they govern is not theirs. When the governor changes, MySpace to Facebook, Vine to TikTok, Twitter to Blue Sky, the underlying relationships can migrate to the new jurisdiction. They do migrate. We have watched it happen repeatedly over 2 decades. So the accurate picture is this: platforms supply genuine organizational value in the katasis phase, and that value is real. But the enduring compounding asset that sustains a platform year after year is the ongoing relational activity of its users. The catalyst can be replaced. The catalyzed population is harder to replace. Even on the most conservative reading, the scarcity in the system shifts over time away from the platform side and toward the user side. What would the coordination layer cost if it were priced honestly? A useful benchmark: infrastructure-style platforms that do nothing but match supply and demand payment rails. Credit card networks, basic marketplaces in their early days typically clear their costs and a healthy margin on transaction fees of around 5%. That is the real price of pure coordination. What today's dominant platforms actually extract once you add visible take rates to the hidden tax of paid placement, algorithmic ranking, and service fees that did not exist 10 years ago, runs closer to 5–10% of transaction value. A 5% coordination fee is enough to attract sellers, fund operations, and still leave a dividend for the people whose activity makes the network worth anything. The gap between 5% and 30% is not a payment for coordination. It is a payment for the accident that one side of the equation got to write the terms. What happens when software is near free? There is a second move in the defense of platforms that needs a careful answer. It goes, coordination software may have near zero marginal cost, but low cost doesn't mean low value. Google Search is nearly free to operate per query and yet enormously valuable. That is correct. Low marginal cost on its own says nothing about how much value software creates. But notice where the value of that software actually comes from. Google Search running in a closed lab, serving 10 engineers, is an interesting piece of technology worth a modest amount. Google Search serving 3 billion users is a trillion-dollar asset. The same code, the same algorithms, the same servers, but the valuation differs by many orders of magnitude because of who is on the other end of the wire. This is the part worth stating clearly. Software value at platform scale is derivative of user scale. It is not that the software is worthless without users, nothing so extreme. It is that the extraordinary valuations we observe in the platform economy are produced by the multiplication of two things: a piece of software often replicable and a user base often not. Taking either factor to zero collapses the value. Holding one constant and growing the other grows the value. Once you see this, the question of who really produces the value resolves into a less dramatic but more useful question. In what proportion do the two sides of the equation contribute to the outcome, and in what proportion do they share the outcome? The contribution proportions are empirical and, on any honest accounting, substantial on both sides. The share proportions, how the financial returns actually get divided, are clearly more concentrated than the contributions themselves. It is the gap between the two that is the real subject of this essay, a simple map of the system. Before going further, it helps to name the parts of the system cleanly, because most of the confusion in debates about who owns the internet comes from mixing them up. The digital economy runs on 3 layers, not one. At the bottom is the infrastructure layer, the physical devices, the cables, the wireless spectrum, and the open protocols that make connection possible at all. In the middle is the platform layer, the ranking algorithms, matching systems, payment rails, and interface designs that turn raw connection into usable services. On top is the user layer, the behavior, content, attention, relationships, and consumption that give the whole system something to do. Each layer contributes something different, and none of them works alone. The infrastructure layer sets the physical and protocol limits. The platform layer provides transformation and governance. The user layer provides the ongoing behavioral and relational inputs that the other 2 layers process. This is not a ranking, it is a map. The interesting question is not which layer matters most in the abstract. The interesting question is how costs and returns are distributed across the 3 layers, and whether the distribution matches the contribution. That is where the system gets strange. The split at the heart of the machine. Now zoom in on the seam between the platform layer and the user layer. This is where the system's strangest feature sits, and it is the reason the imbalance is structurally unstable rather than merely unequal. At that seam, 2 complementary assets meet: software, the algorithm, the platform code, the trained models and hardware, the phones, the fiber, the human attention looking at the screen. The platform runs on both, neither works alone. But the 2 halves are owned by different populations. The software is owned by the company. The hardware, every device, every connection, every hour of attention, every dollar spent through the system is owned and maintained by users. Users upgrade the devices at their own expense. They pay for the network. They feed new behavior into the models every day. They generate the next batch of training data simply by living their lives. In a traditional business, the entity that bears the ongoing capital and operating costs is also the entity that owns the upside. That is the basic bargain of enterprise. You pay for the factory, you own what comes out. Internet platforms have, quietly, decoupled the two. The population paying the ongoing costs and the population receiving the ongoing returns are different populations. How free hid the real transaction? And here is the reason the imbalance has held up for as long as it has. The user does not feel like a contributor. The user feels like a beneficiary. The app is free. The search is free. The map is free. Against that backdrop of generosity, the suggestion that the user is co-producing the service sounds ungrateful, almost absurd. But free is not what is actually happening. What is happening is a trade of unusual structure, where one side pays in cash and the other side pays in hardware, attention, data, and consumption. Both sides give something. Both sides get something. The software owner grants access to the software. The hardware owner supplies the device, the time, the data, and the purchase. It is not charity, it is exchange. The trouble is that only one side keeps the books. The software owner records revenue, profit, users, engagement, data assets. The hardware owner records nothing. There is no line on a household budget that says contributed $4,000 of phone hardware, 1,200 hours of attention, and several terabytes of behavioral data to the platform economy this year. The contribution happens but does not appear in any ledger the contributor owns. This is what free actually does. It does not eliminate the transaction. It hides the contributor's role in it. It converts the user from a counterparty into what feels like a guest, and a guest does not claim ownership of the house, even when the guest has been sleeping there for 20 years, paying for the utilities, and quietly building the extension out back. The hard part, can any of this be priced? An honest essay has to stop here and admit something difficult. Even if everything above is correct, there is a real problem with acting on it. The user's contributions are hard to price. Is your data an asset or a byproduct of your behavior? Is your attention a resource you own or simply the direction of your gaze? Is your time on a platform rent, labor, entertainment, or all three at once? The categories we inherited from industrial economics do not map cleanly onto these things. Property rights over data, attention, and generated content remain legally fuzzy in most jurisdictions. This is a real obstacle, and pretending otherwise would be naive. But it is worth remembering, property rights have always started out fuzzy. Land titles were contested for centuries before modern registries. Water rights, mineral rights, airspace, broadcast spectrum, and carbon emissions were all, at one point, considered unownable or impossible to measure. They became priceable because the economic pressure to price them became too large to ignore, and institutions evolved to handle them. Data, attention, and behavioral contribution are on the same trajectory. The European Union's GDPR regime, the wave of USS tape privacy laws passed over the last several years, the ongoing legal fights over what AI systems can be trained on, and the early data dividend experiments in places like Alaska and California are all first attempts, clumsy ones, to make these contributions measurable and assignable. The work is not finished. It is also not optional. The underlying asset is too large, too persistent, and too concentrated in too few hands to stay invisible forever. Free has served for 20 years as a kind of cap over the question. It has also prevented the market from seeing where attention actually goes, which means capital cannot follow it accurately, which means resources end up misallocated at scale. The debt overhangs and environmental strains of the digital economy are downstream of that misallocation, not its cause, but its receipt. Giving user contributions a legible price is what would finally let the market see what it has been doing in the dark. What has already been built without the split? It is worth pausing here to note that some of the most valuable infrastructure on the internet was built without the split between software owner and hardware owner. Those projects have quietly outperformed the alternatives. Wikipedia replaced the Encyclopedia Britannica. Britannica stopped printing in 2012. Wikipedia serves 1 billion people a month. Linux, maintained by volunteers, runs the majority of the world's servers, virtually every Android phone, every Mac, and every top 500 supercomputer. Open source software as a whole was valued in a 2024 Harvard Business School study at $8.8 trillion in replacement cost, produced almost entirely for free. In the economic theory most of us were taught, none of this should exist. Rational actors don't produce valuable goods without payment, yet these aren't curiosities, they are core infrastructure. Where the software community and the user community are the same community, the system tends to be more durable, more trusted, and more productive than where they are split. This is not an ideological claim, it is measurable output. The reason is simple. When a platform collapses the line between using something and producing it, when watching a video is training the algorithm, editing a page is creating the encyclopedia, driving a car is teaching the self-driving system, the old question, why would anyone work without pay, becomes the wrong question. The work is indistinguishable from the enjoyment. People contribute because it satisfies them. Billions of hours of uncoerced, high-quality labor enter the system every year as a byproduct of lives being lived. The productivity paradox. Here is the strangest statistic of the last decade. As digital productivity has exploded, real wages in advanced economies have stagnated and household debt has climbed to historic highs. The productivity gains went somewhere. They did not go to the people producing them. This isn't a scandal, it's an accounting problem, a real one, not a rhetorical one. The measurement systems of the industrial economy don't have a category for the value you create by being yourself on your own phone. So that value gets credited to whoever owns the servers, and only to them. The question for the coming decade, then, is not whether to overthrow anything. It is a quieter and more practical one. Once the mismatch is visible, what does a system that doesn't have it look like? The quiet shift. When someone says the economy is changing, they usually mean a new industry is rising. Sometimes the change runs deeper. Sometimes the underlying logic of how value is made and who makes it shifts, and the old categories stop describing reality well. We are living through one of those shifts. Not because anyone planned it, but because the technology made it happen. 1 billion people editing Wikipedia in their spare time is not a policy, it's a fact. 1 trillion data points training a language model is not a manifesto, it's a fact. The Linux kernel running the world's servers is not an argument, it's a fact. What's still up for grabs is the institutional layer. The contracts, the share structures, the terms of service, the laws about data ownership, the definition of what counts as work. That layer has not caught up with reality yet. It will, because institutions that misdescribe reality get more expensive to maintain every year. And there is a further reason it will. The digital economy is extraordinarily efficient at moving information, while the physical economy it feeds into is not. When a high-efficiency layer is governed by rules designed for a low-efficiency one, the high-efficiency layer does not become more like the low-efficiency one, it amplifies the low-efficiency one's mistakes. The debt cycles and resource misallocations of the last 2 decades are what that amplification looks like in practice. Bringing the institutional layer forward is not a matter of taste, it is maintenance. You don't need to pick a side in any old argument to see it. You just have to look at your phone and ask the question that never appears on any receipt. Who actually built what I'm using, and who has been paying the bills for it ever since? The answer is already clear. We have just been writing the receipts in the wrong names. The receipts that matter are not the ones the platforms send to advertisers. They are the ones that have never been printed, the hours of attention, the devices replaced, the content uploaded, the relationships maintained. No one has represented the user's own labor more faithfully than the user's own time spent living has. That is what a share-based internet would finally put on the books, not a revolution, just an honest accounting.